Ben Ingram from the Atlanta Braves radio network, play-by-play voice of the Atlanta Braves. Ben, thanks for calling in the Breakfast Show.
Absolutely, Brett. Good to speak with you today.
All right, so first things first, man. The past, I guess 12 hours, 24 hours, what's the buzz been like across all your circles there in Major League Baseball with the passing of legendary Bob Uecker?
It's kind of shocking, to be quite honest, because he's one of those larger-than-life guys that you just don't think about going through a baseball season without. And I was able to reach out to Jeff Levering earlier today. He's one of the broadcasters there in Milwaukee. He's been there for, 10, 12 years at least. And those guys are torn up, and you can imagine. Ueck was the life of not just their broadcast, but Milwaukee Brewers baseball altogether. I can't think of too many broadcasters over the years who have had a stature within their organization and within the game that was equal or greater than the team on the field. It's a very, very short list, and Ueck's on that list. And when you think about the Brewers, and sure, they've had some great players come through there, but I think the guy that you think of first when it comes to Milwaukee Brewers baseball is the guy behind the microphone, and that's Ueck. So he's been that for so many years, just an amazing entertainer, a once-in-a-lifetime comedian, and a terrific baseball broadcaster, and it's a massive loss for the game.
Let's talk about maybe you and your interactions with Uecker over the years. I don't know how it is in Major League Baseball, but in high school sports, we always talk to the other broadcasters. We get there early, kind of, mingle a little bit. Is it like that when, say when you would go to Milwaukee, did you have time to go interact with Ueck? And if you did, what was that like, the first time you got to go and kind of mingle with the legend that's Bob Uecker?
It's pretty surreal the first time I ever met him. In fact, the first time I met him, I brought a baseball because I wanted him to sign a baseball. So I've got a baseball that's got his autograph on there. He's got Hall of Fame 2003 on there. And that was a thrill for me just getting to meet him. But he was just so funny, and it didn't matter if you had met him once or multiple times. He was going to be himself. And I didn't know Ueck all that well. I probably met him 3 or 4 times over the years. He passes today. He's 90 years old. And as long as I've known him, he's been a guy in his 80s or so. So it's not like he was coming down to our booth very often at all. If we wanted to go see him, you had to go down to his booth, and he would hold court, and it was just great. That entire team between Jeff and Lane and Kent, they've got some great broadcasters, and they're always very welcoming because they knew that everybody wanted to come in and speak to Bob and say hello to Bob and get a laugh along the way, and he would always give you that. The thing that I think about with Bob Uecker is how first class the Brewers were when it came to how they treated him. I don't know of anybody who was a rock star the way that Bob Uecker was, and I'll give you a few examples of that. When it comes to where we park, when we show up for a ball game, lots of us have designated parking areas that are convenient to get in and out of the stadium. They let Bob park in the service level. He just drove right into the stadium, left his car wherever he wanted. He had his own little locker room with his own locker that adjoined to the Brewers locker room, and it was almost like he was another player. So he'd drive his Corvette into the service level and just hand the keys to one of the custodians there. They'd take care of the car, and he just strolled right on in, probably played golf that morning, changed clothes, showered, all that, and then went up and called the game. And then when he came down, they had an elevator waiting on him. There's a media elevator there at the ballpark in Milwaukee, and while we're allowed to ride it, we could load up on the elevator, but that elevator would not leave until Bob came out of the press box and got on the elevator. It was awesome. So the first-class treatment that they gave a guy who deserved it, to me, stands out so much about his status, just rock star status there in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin altogether. So those are the things that stand out to me. I could tell you some stories and probably break some FCC violations along the way, but he was just that comedic and that funny and that much of an entertainer even till the final day.
Ben, one thing about baseball and, baseball broadcasting on the air, obviously you think about it, the greats, you think about Vin Scully. The consummate professional is Vin Scully, but then you have sort of a different style with Bob Uecker, and not saying anyone's right or wrong or better than the other, but it's just different. People ask me all the time, what's the hardest thing to broadcast? I always say baseball, because you have so much time to fill, you have to be entertaining, and you have to make sure you know your stuff and that people don't change the channel. Just going through today, looking at all my favorite Bob Uecker quotes, I found the one that I love the most was, in TV, they can see it. In radio, you have to create it. And that's what makes guys like you and Bob Uecker and Vin Scully, the baseball guys, really well. And Uecker did that just about better than anybody. When you turned on the game, you were going to know what happened, and you're going to be in for a good time.
Yeah, you were. And, something to your point, he was himself. And I think that's the key so much when it comes to broadcasting. There's already been a Bob Uecker. There's already been a Vin Scully and so on and so forth. I think for young broadcasters coming up, you have to be you. And for Uecker, obviously, that was so easy for him. He was going to be unapologetically himself, and that was always going to be entertaining. And it's funny because I've heard him say so many disparaging comments about his career, but he knows that it's funny. I mean, he was a career 200 hitter, and he wasn't a great ball player, but at the end of the day, he was a big leaguer, and he was a big leaguer for a while. He was part of the Cardinals team that won the World Series in 1964. I think that he knew that he could make people laugh, and he was going to stick to that. He knew where he was good. He knew that he was good at that, and he could tell a great story. So he was going to be himself, and he didn't worry about if his style was like anybody else's or anything like that. He was going to be himself. And I think that's what made him so great, because he wasn't afraid to do that. He was not afraid to be himself and make people laugh. And I've spoken with guys who have worked with him, and sure, he was a really good broadcaster, and if the game's tied in the eighth inning, he's going to have you locked in. But so many guys have said he was at his best when it was an 8-0 game. And whether the Brewers were leading or trailing, he was going to entertain you and make you laugh. And a lot of times he was at his best when the game was out of hand, and he could really dive off into some kind of humorous story about a player or a team or a year or himself and whatever it may be. But I think that's what made him so great, the fact that he was going to be himself, and him being authentically him made him one of the best.
Yeah, and we can't talk about Bob Uecker without talking about Harry Doyle and how many people were just introduced to him through that movie Major League. Obviously, you and I from Mississippi, when we grew up, you couldn't just turn on an app and listen to the Milwaukee Brewers, right? You had to listen to what was on locally, right? So I was introduced to Bob Uecker through Harry Doyle, found out that he was the Milwaukee Brewers play-by-play guy. And I was just talking to someone earlier this week on Tuesday night. I was at a basketball game, and then we're talking about baseball coming up, and somebody said, Breck, you got to throw in a Harry Doyle quote in your commentary this year. And I told him, I said, well, most of my favorite Harry Doyle quotes probably get me kicked off the air. But I mean, you know about that. How many times does someone come up to you and say just a bit outside or something like that, some kind of Harry Doyle quote, when they find out that you do what you do for a living?
Oh, all the time. I mean, it's like if anybody throws in any kind of quote, it's so many times it's from that movie or it's something else that Uecker did. I mean, you're exactly right. You and I didn't grow up listening to Milwaukee Brewers baseball games on the radio, but we saw WrestleMania when he was in it. We saw the Johnny Carson show, as he was a guest, I think 100 times on the Carson show. Knew him from Major League and other things as well. So I knew who he was. I remember the Miller Lite commercials when I was a kid, and I thought they were hysterical. And he was a big part of that. So I think that it wasn't just what he did on the air for the Brewers. He made himself a star nationally with his humors, and that's where so many people are introduced to him. I still watch that movie every off season right before the season starts, and I'm watching it to hear his stuff again because it is so funny. But that's it. He wasn't just limited to Milwaukee Brewers baseball. He was that much of an entertainer. He was that humorous to where people wanted him to do all sorts of different things, and that's what made him so good, is he could do so many different things and still maintain that same level of comedic value.
Yeah, the word transcendent, transcended baseball, and you kind of just own over into pop culture. But you talk about Major League, I usually watch it the night before my first high school baseball broadcast, and, I might have a Miller Lite or two this weekend for our pal Bob Uecker. I saw that somebody posted out that there's the statue outside the stadium, and somebody just opened a Miller Lite and put it right there at the base of one of the statues there at the Brewers Stadium. So that's pretty cool. But Ben Ingram from the Atlanta Braves radio network joining us here on the BreckFast Show. He's a local guy. He's from Madison County, right down the road. I think you got Deer Camp right up the road in Choctaw County. So Ben, you're about a month away before you're going to be back in the booth. Is that right?
Yeah, our first game down in the Grapefruit League's February 22nd. So I'm going to head down like the 18th or 19th, I think, and get settled in and ready for baseball. We call every single spring training game. There aren't too many teams that broadcast all 30 of their spring training games. We do, and then we'll go right from that into the regular season. We start the regular season out west with a trip to San Diego and then L.A. So I every year, Breck, I get through Christmas and New Year's, and I'm ready to go, man. And I know we've got another month or so. and I should enjoy the time down. But once we get through New Year's, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to some warmer weather and get to some baseball. So I can't wait. It'll be getting there pretty quick.